Welcome everyone. My name is Cade Underwood. I'm the current director of the Penn Housing Rights Project, and I'm serving as today's panel moderator. Thanks for joining us for the panel discussion focusing on the affordable housing crisis in Philadelphia. We're hoping that you all gain a better understanding of the housing landscape surrounding us in Philadelphia, and we especially hope that you will take the understanding outside of the classroom, maybe into your future work. Before we get started, we want to give a special thanks to our sponsors and organizers for the event. That's the Penn Housing Rights Project, the Black Law Students Association, the Latinx Law Students Association, Lambda, and Housing for All over at the Weitzman School of Design. And also, of course, TPEC for holding and organizing the space. We're going to begin with an overview of the current landscape of housing and housing affordability in Philadelphia. Then we'll move on to address both the legal landscape of housing and protections for tenants and housing affordability. Following both those frameworks, we will hear from two resident organizers from the University City Townhomes Coalition, located at 3900 to 3999 Market Street. We hope that this panel provides you with knowledge, not only to understand the issues we're discussing, but also to inform how you understand your own positionality, both as students living in Philadelphia and as future practicing attorneys. So now I'll introduce our panel of speakers. First, we have Emily Dowdle with the Reinvestment Fund. Emily Dowdle is the Policy Director for the Policy Solutions Group at the Reinvestment Fund, which is a mission-driven community development organization based in Philadelphia. She helps public and nonprofit sector leaders use data to make programming and investment decisions that support equitable communities. She has conducted research on housing stability, neighborhood change, and social well-being in cities including Philadelphia, New Orleans, Pittsburgh, and Richmond, Virginia. She has authored recent briefs on evictions in Philadelphia and the rise of investor purchasing of single-family homes. Prior to the Reinvestment Fund, she researched critical issues facing Philadelphia and other cities for the Pew Charitable Trusts, producing major reports on gentrification and the role of public libraries, among other topics. She has a BA in Metropolitan Studies from New York University and a Master of City Planning from the University of Pennsylvania, where she is also a lecturer in housing policy and urban development. Our next panelist is Sari Bernstein. Sari Bernstein has been a staff attorney with the Public Interest Law Center since 2021 and focuses her practice on housing and environmental justice. Prior to joining the Law Center, Ms. Bernstein was a housing staff attorney in the Civil Division of the Legal Aid Society in New York City. There she defended tenants facing eviction in housing court, pursuing counterclaims when landlords failed to provide habitable housing and for overcharges. She also filed a case against one of New York City's largest landlord representing law firms for federal consumer protection violations under the Federal Debt Collections Practices Act. In addition, Ms. Bernstein litigated a successful contempt trial against the New York City Housing Authority after the agency repeatedly failed to address outbreaks of mold in public housing, even after being ordered to do so as part of a federal consent decree. Previously, she taught adult literacy classes to individuals re-entering their communities after incarceration at the Fortune Society, and worked as an associate at Jacobs and Hazen LLP, where she represented plaintiffs in police misconduct civil rights cases. Our last two panelists are Ms. Darlene Foreman and Mr. Melvin Hairston. Ms. Darlene Foreman is a 20-year-long resident of the UC Townhomes, born and raised in the Black Bottom. She has raised 3 children there, who are all grown, doing well. She's a 10-year veteran of the U.S. military. She enjoys organizing and is a dedicated advocate for housing justice for herself and for her fellow residents. Foreman is a fighter and is going to stay in the fight to save the townhomes till the end. And Mr. Melvin Hairston is a 28-year-long resident of the UC Townhomes, born and raised in Philadelphia. He has been a resident organizer of the Save UC Townhomes fight and is a voice of power for the justice of the people. All right, so now we're going to hear, well, let's give a quick round of applause for our panel. Now we're going to jump into short presentations from each panelist, followed by a larger panel discussion. So to kick us off, Emily Dowdle has prepared a presentation that aims to explain the current state of housing within Philadelphia. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Is that wonderful? It's nice to be here today. It's really an honor to be here with these other panelists, especially people who are really living this struggle with affordable housing right now. So I'm going to talk through some of our data that we look at Reinvestment Fund. So Reinvestment Fund is a community development financial institution. That means a large part of what the business is lending for things like constructing new affordable housing, new grocery stores, quality early child care, things of that nature. But I'm on the research team, and so we do a lot of living in maps and data and help people who are making decisions use that data. But so I first wanted to start with defining what affordability is. And so the common definition that's used in policy is that people should spend no more than 30% of their household income on housing for it to be considered affordable. Oops, I lost my slide. What happened? Thank you. Let's do this. Yeah, thank you. All right, so, but this definition is not perfect, right? Because if you have someone who earns $200,000 and they're spending 50% of their income on housing, they're still not going to struggle to pay for food or other essentials. But if you have someone who's earning $20,000 and they're paying 20% of their income towards housing, they're still going to struggle, right? So it's an imperfect definition, but it's the one that's widely used for setting policy, for setting prices of affordable homes, and also just for understanding where people are dealing with housing stress. So it's sort of this imperfect, but it's what we're using right now. And even using this imperfect tool, it still picks up that the lowest income households and renters in particular are more likely to be in unaffordable homes. So when we look at households across Philadelphia, we see that about 60% of all households are spending 30% or less of their income on housing. While 18% are spending between 30 to 50%, which means we call them cost burdened. And another 21% are spending over 50%, which we call severely cost burdened. So altogether, about 40% of all Philadelphia households across owners and renters are living in unaffordable housing right now. And when we break that down by income and renter and tenure, meaning do they rent or do they own, we see that unaffordable housing is concentrated among people who have lower incomes and who are renters. So when we look at the first set of bars on the left there, for people earning less than $20,000 a year, we see that almost 90%, almost a supermajority of people in that group are cost burdened. And that doesn't matter whether you're an owner or a renter. And when you go up to the next income bracket of $20,000 to $35,000, you see that owners in that bracket are much more likely to be able to afford their home, but renters, still 85% of those renters earning up to $35,000 are cost burdened. And then we see, if you keep going across these bars, when you get to people with income over $75,000, hardly anybody who earns at least $75,000 is cost burdened in the city of Philadelphia, right? So we're talking about, even with this imperfect measure, it does help us see that the unaffordability crisis is facing largely people who are earning less than $50,000 and who are renters. That's where it's most acute. We worked with the city in the spring on the new assessment of fair housing, and that involved a survey of 5,000 city residents. And one of the questions we asked was, did you experience trouble with these types of housing costs over the last year? Rent, utilities, home repairs, taxes, and mortgages. And we saw that Black and Hispanic respondents, who are represented here by the red and the blue lines, were much more likely to report difficulty paying rent, utilities. We saw that people identifying as Asian Pacific Islander were much more likely to report difficulty with home repairs, costs, taxes, and mortgages than other Philadelphians. So remember, it's not always just about your rent and your mortgage, but there's things like utilities that can really add up and cause people to feel like they're in an unaffordable situation. Relatedly, we've done research on eviction and who faces eviction in Philadelphia. And eviction is much more common in lower income areas. It's very much a structural economic problem. And we see, so to explain this table a lot, because I know it's a bunch of numbers, so we divided Philadelphia renter households into these major racial and ethnic groupings: Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, other. And then we took a look at the number of eviction filings. And so the number of households in each of those groups who faced an eviction filing in order to create an eviction filing rate for each of those groups. And what we see is the eviction filing rate for Black renter households in Philadelphia is about 3 times as high as the white eviction rate. So the people who are affected by, so evictions are not evenly distributed across the population, right? They're more likely to affect Black households and Hispanic households. Right now, the eviction system is sort of in flux as various programs have come and gone during the pandemic. And so right now, landlords do still have to apply to go through eviction diversion in order to get to eviction, but what that means differs based on how much rent you owe and some other considerations. So rather than looking at the updated filings, we looked here at eviction diversion applications. And so you can see, and a lot of these still end up being filings later, but they're a little bit delayed. But some of them are not. But the point is, even though the volume is down considerably since pre-pandemic, we still see there's an outsized impact on the Black and Hispanic populations in Philadelphia compared to other populations. Okay. And then speaking about sort of the limits of the affordability framework. So right now, the federal government and a lot of other programs base subsidized housing costs, setting what the rent is in subsidized housing based on the area median income, which is taken from the 11 counties surrounding Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. That AMI is $96,000. But when we break down the income by counties, I think you'll notice who the outlier is, right? So there's Philadelphia way down there at the bottom with earning less than $60,000. And so what that means is, so this chart compares the Philadelphia income at each of these income percentages to the region. And so first I'll ask you just to look at those two columns that say 100%. And so those are the median incomes. The yellow bar is the median income for Philadelphia, $58,000. $96,000 is the area median income. And so when you think about that, so when housing is priced for people earning 80% of the AMI, that's going to be for a family earning $77,000. But $77,000 is more than what half of the Philadelphians earn, right? And when we look at what 100% of median income is for Philadelphia, that's actually equivalent to about 60% of the AMI. And so what that means is that half of Philadelphia households can't afford what are technically affordable units that are priced at 80% AMI. They need housing that's going to be affordable at incomes at 60% of AMI or below. And so the city has estimated that available housing subsidy, and that includes housing choice vouchers, is only enough to meet 12% of demand in the city. So there's a massive gap between the supply of low-cost housing and the demand for it. And to take a look at where there is housing affordability in the city, just very high level, this map shows the most expensive markets are in purple and blue, the lowest cost markets are in orange and red. And seeing where people are at the Philadelphia median income are able to afford housing in Philadelphia, the median housing cost. And so this is based on the median white household income, which was a little bit higher than others. And you'll have to excuse that this is a placeholder from 2018, but the pattern stands. So for median white household incomes, people, those households can't access every neighborhood in Philadelphia. They can't get to the far northwest or the far northeast, but they can access a lot of these more middle neighborhoods. Cedar Brook, the lower northeast, parts of Overbrook. But then we look at the city median for Black incomes, and then the ability to get to access and afford neighborhoods is even more constrained. And you can see that Center City and University City are completely unaffordable, right? And you can see that for Hispanic households who have an even lower median income, the geography of opportunity for housing is even more constrained. We at Reinvestment Fund developed a measure trying to identify displacement risk associated with gentrification or rising prices, and we basically compare median sale price over time to income at a fixed starting point to see whether a family who had the typical income of a neighborhood at a starting point, say 2010, would still be able to live there or buy in there in 2020. And we look at that over time. So this is time machine back to 2000. And you can see that the greatest displacement pressure at the time was mostly around Center City. And if we go up to 2020, we can see this massive, this is where all the displacement pressure has been since 2000 to 2020. So very much stretching out from Center City. You can see it going up into Brewerytown, Fishtown, all around University City and West, Point Breeze, Grays Ferry. I think probably if you're familiar with the map of the city, none of this is that surprising to you, but this is where the most pressure has been over the last 20 years. So including right where we are right now. In the decade from 2010 to 2020, there was population loss, Black population loss, and we were interested to see which of that coincided with gentrification. And so, the story is not all of it, and we know there's push and pull factors that have led to a decreasing Black population in Philadelphia, including that housing in the suburbs is now more accessible, as a success of the Fair Housing Act and enforcement, so Black families are more likely to be able to live in the suburbs if they choose to. But also, there has been coinciding gentrification and loss of the Black population in Point Breeze and parts of West Philadelphia and parts of North Philadelphia around Temple. So right here on the map, you can see those areas where there's the blue hatching over the dark purple. That's where there's been Black population loss and gentrification at the same time. And then that's the pressure from 2010 to 2015, and this is updated through 2020. So it spreads out a little bit more. And then finally, I just want to say a couple words about our investor research, which is also all related. So we had started seeing these uptick in investor purchases of single-family homes in our work around the country. We first really noticed it in Jacksonville. It happened much earlier there. But we began to notice it here, too, at home. And so we wanted to understand where this was happening because it seemed like it was concentrated in Black neighborhoods. And whenever there's like a real estate phenomenon like concentrated in Black neighborhoods, we're worried about predatory lending and things like that. Predatory behavior. And so we looked at we broke down all of the sales of single family homes by who sold them, if it was a homeowner or an investor, and who bought it, if it was a homeowner or investor, using these very broad categories to see who properties were flowing to and the possible impact on homeownership in Philadelphia. So, there's still a lot of homeowner sales, very concentrated in the upper northwest, northeast, River Ward, Center City. Investors to homeowners, this is where there's some flipping action. You can definitely see that a lot of flipping is happening in Point Breeze and Brewerytown, around Temple. Investors to investors, so this is where properties that were already rental properties but are changing hands, and this is something we want to look into more because there's a whole lot of different types of investors, right? Not all landlords are the same. Some investors are improving neighborhoods and some are not. Some investors are good landlords, some are irresponsible landlords. But this was what we were most interested in, is where homes were going from homeowners to investors. And this map really lines up with a lot of where the Black neighborhoods of Philadelphia are, right? Areas of West Philadelphia, Cobbs Creek, Strawberry Mansion, up into Nicetown, Tioga, as well as in some Hispanic neighborhoods. And so this is something we've been looking into more, what that means. And this is my final slide that I will share with everybody else. But so we looked at neighborhoods by the share of all of the housing sales that were bought by investors. And so, and then we looked at the characteristics of those neighborhoods, because we really think that in a lot of these neighborhoods, it's not that there's no demand to buy housing, but that people are shut out of the housing market. They can't compete with investors, they can't get loans. And so to draw your attention to that final bar, that's to the second to final bar that says 45% plus. So those are places where at least 45%, so almost half of sales, were homes being purchased by investors. And we saw that in those neighborhoods, the denial rates were 30% for home mortgage applications. We saw that the share of sale with mortgages was much lower than elsewhere, only 55%. So this is cash buyers. And we saw that the share of residents of color was 91% in these high investor neighborhoods. And we saw that these areas had lower incomes. They were about 50% of the city median income compared to higher incomes elsewhere. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks a lot. So now we're going to try to tie into
I mean, we're all law students, right? We're kind of trying to the legality of the situation, legal frameworks that Public Interest Law Center, along with other legal aid organizations and attorneys are working with throughout the city. So, Sari, can you give us a broad overview of the legal protections that exist for tenants or for preserving affordable housing in Philadelphia?
Yes. So, can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. I think everyone can hear me. So my presentation doesn't lend itself as well to a PowerPoint because you would just look at Fair Housing Act. So I'm just going to stay seated here. But the patchwork of protections for rental tenants, who I'm going to be talking about today, is, sort of significant. It goes from federal protections to state protections to city protections. So it kind of falls into two categories and how it overlaps with affordability. There's the legal protections, and then there's the funding streams. And what legal protections you have very much overlap with the funding streams as well. So in terms of funding, in Philadelphia, basically the affordable housing that gets most of its funding from the federal government. There's the Philadelphia Housing Authority, right? And so that's, I think, the largest landlord. They are the largest landlord in Philadelphia. So the Philadelphia Housing Authority gets a lot of its money from the federal government. There's also a bit of a patchwork from state funding, but the vast majority of it is federal funding. Then there are buildings that are privately owned. That would include UC townhomes, right, which are privately owned but have federal funding through a project-based scheme. And what that means is that the folks living in those apartments get their subsidy by virtue of living in that apartment. You can't take it with you unless you're given a different kind of voucher, which we'll get to later. The folks in UC townhomes obviously have been given a different kind of voucher that they can move with. In Philadelphia, the number of project-based units, you might hear it called project-based Section 8, is on the decrease as it is all over the country. And that is because federal subsidies that were entered into usually between 30 and 40 years ago are coming up. They've come due, and landlords are deciding that they want to sell the buildings, and the new owners don't necessarily want to enter into contracts with the federal government. And actually the same kinds of contracts don't even necessarily exist. So we certainly see this in UC townhomes, and in the next 5 years or so, there's about 1,700 other project-based units within Philadelphia with contracts that are set to expire. If you match that with some of the statistics that Emily showed us about the affordability crisis in Philadelphia, that's pretty stark, right? So there are the project-based units, and then there are what we call tenant-based vouchers. So that's most commonly known as a Section 8 voucher. It's also legally called a housing choice voucher. And that's a kind of voucher that a household will have funded through the federal government through a local public housing agency, which in this case is the Philadelphia Housing Authority. And you can move with that voucher. So you're still living in private housing, but you do have this federal voucher that you can move with, and you have a fixed income with that, a fixed rent with that voucher that is about 30% of your income towards the rent, and then the public housing agency pays the difference. So that matches up with this, approximate 30% affordability metric that is used nationwide and in Philadelphia. And so what this means is that in terms of creating affordable housing, a housing choice voucher, just by virtue of the way it works, it creates another affordable unit. It's not publicly owned, it's not on that map, but it's a really important piece of the affordable housing puzzle in Philadelphia. There is a massive wait list for housing choice vouchers. It can take years to get a voucher, and people do sit on the wait list waiting for a voucher. Just in terms of the demographics of who has housing choice vouchers in Philadelphia, there are currently 19,350 housing choice vouchers in the city. The largest influx of vouchers came last year during COVID. There were 863 that were added through, they're called emergency housing choice vouchers, but they operate essentially the same. Of those approximately 19,000 vouchers, 84% of voucher holders are Black, 9% are white. Over 70% of housing choice voucher holders make under $20,000 a year. Again, put that into the metric that Emily showed us about affordability. Essentially what we're saying is that if these folks don't have housing choice vouchers, they're essentially foreclosed from the Philadelphia private market, right? Okay, so now it's really important that you can use the voucher, and that's where some of the legal protections come in. So I just want to set the framework a little bit there too. There are federal laws that give us protections. The most well-known, the most important of those is the Fair Housing Act. And in the Fair Housing Act, you have certain protected classes, which means that you cannot be discriminated against in the sale or rental of housing based on your race, based on national origin, religion, disability, familial status, sexual orientation. I may be missing one or two. You can email me about that later. But what you don't see there is source of income. Okay. Then there are some state protections in Pennsylvania, but they're not too significant for this conversation, so I'm going to kind of skip over them. But Philadelphia has a really important law. It's called the Fair Practices Ordinance. It's written into the Philadelphia Code. And what is included in the Fair Practices Ordinance is source of income discrimination protections. So it's a protected class in Philadelphia that's not protected strictly under the Fair Housing Act. This law has been on the books since 1980. And in practical terms, what source of income discrimination really means is when you're going to rent an apartment, a landlord cannot discriminate against you on the basis of how you're planning to pay your rent. That it could be with income, it could be with alimony or child support. Some of you all might be familiar with this. It could be with a guarantor. How many of you have gone and rented an apartment needing a guarantor because you're a student right now? But what it also covers are subsidies, housing subsidies like housing choice vouchers. And in Philadelphia, this law is essentially kind of blatantly ignored. You can go on Craigslist or one of a bunch of other lists, and I'm sure you all are going to be talking about this, and you'll just see advertised no Section 8. It's on landlords' websites. It's a huge problem. And so one of the things that the Law Center has been really focused on, and I've been focused on, is how to strengthen that protection. Okay, so who enforces it? There is a local administrative body. It's called the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations. Have any of you heard of that? Show of hands. Okay, more hands than I thought. Excellent. So the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations is the local body that is there to enforce the Fair Practices Ordinance. And they are the ones who kind of provide both the administrative forum where these complaints are filed and then investigated, but also they will sort of take on the complaint and quote unquote prosecute it if there's a finding of discrimination. In Philadelphia, there is essentially no case law on kind of defining what does source of income mean. And it's one of the issues that we're trying to rectify because landlords, property management agencies are much less likely to comply with the law if it's not being vigorously enforced. So based on an Urban Institute study in 2018, about 67% of Philadelphia landlords, based on testing, just blatantly said we don't accept Section 8. Blatantly violated the law. That goes up to 86% in neighborhoods that are over 80% white. So the discrimination is that much stronger in those neighborhoods. So how does one file a complaint? In Philly, and this is different in other jurisdictions that have source of income laws, you have to first file with the local commission. It's called administrative exhaustion. And the commission basically has exclusive jurisdiction over that claim for about a year, for a year under the law, while it investigates unless it comes to a different decision before that year is up. at which point there's a private right of action. This is different than in other places like New York, DC. You don't have an administrative burden. There's still a local agency that investigates and is in charge of sort of quote unquote, again, enforcing and prosecuting these cases. It's not actually prosecutorial. It's just like the most convenient word to use for that. But it means that folks have a little bit more flexibility to go to an open court, to get more case law, to have a system that is more robustly enforced than what you see in Philadelphia. I think probably because there's also this administrative burden. But like I said, this law has been on the books since 1980. I'm sure you all have read countless news articles about what is going on at UC townhomes. And you constantly see a sentence from tenants, no one will accept our vouchers. That is illegal in Philadelphia, just to blatantly say, we will not accept vouchers. And so we are trying to do things about that. I think I'll leave it there. Okay.
Thank you, Sari. So this is a massive problem, and we're just kind of like scratching the surface of some different parts of it. We wanted to refocus from the general to the specific by welcoming the perspectives and experiences of two impacted community members, Ms. Darlene Foreman and Mr. Melvin Hairston, who are long-term residents and organizers at the University City Townhomes. So Ms. Foreman and Mr. Hairston, can you share an overview of what has been happening with the University City Townhomes since you were notified of eviction, I think in July 2021?
Is this one? Yes. Well, one quick thing I wanted to what you was talking about. Yesterday I saw on the news where they found a loophole in the system where people that have vouchers in other cities around the country, they found a loophole where these people are coming through, finding housing. While we're looking for housing, they're getting it and getting accepted.
I saw the same report. Yeah.
So it's another problem is created for us, not just us, but other people that are looking for housing. Where we, and this is not even talking about the waiting list that we have here already.
Yeah.
So they're jumping in here and finding housing, and we still can't. So I just wanted to bring it to
Yeah. I was pretty shocked by that report.
Yeah. So what was your question?
Just can you give us a broad overview of what's been happening with the University City Townhomes, like kind of how it started and how the organizing got started?
We have can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you. We have been organizing we've been fighting for a year and 2 months now. Fighting very hard with different entities, the owners, the city, the universities, trying to find a better way for them to help us. Because our vouchers, we have enhanced vouchers that we were given in July, August. So that only gave us like for really 4 months to find housing. But because of the way that we've been fighting and how long we've been fighting and how hard we've been fighting, we keep getting extensions, which is still not fair, but it's all we got and we just have to continue fighting. But we don't want to give that property up or that space because it's home to us. I've been there 28 years. There's people that's been there 40 years. And we have the doctors, our kids' schools, everything that we need to raise a healthy family, we have at University City Townhomes. So even in looking for something that would match what we had is not available to us. Places that they've been showing us, I would not send anybody to live in anything less than what we have because they're horrible. I have a 2-bedroom house. They want to put me in a 1-bedroom apartment. That's not fair. I have disabilities, that I'm handling quite well where I am. And to move it's another hardship. So you wanna ask me?
Yeah, definitely. A lot that's going on is basically a washout of communities between. Sugar and I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
But the economic development in this city with developers and universities has started a clear washout of all the surrounding communities surrounding universities, whether it's Penn, Drexel, Temple, St. Joe's, all those universities and the areas around them have been gentrified and the communities have been washed away. I lived in town for 28 years. It's my own. I mean, the first 16 years of my life, I moved around different parts of the city. So I can say I'm from everywhere in Philly. But being here the last 28 years, when you live somewhere half your life, you feel what community is. The first 16 years, I didn't truly know that feeling because I was moving around so much, so I was in different communities. But being in one spot almost 30 years, you get a real sense of what community is. And when you move from place to place, you don't get that sense. And when you settle in, you get the real feel because your community is your family. And when that is stripped away from you, if you ever had something in your life stripped away from you, you fight to keep that. And that's where we stand right now. And that's where everybody that has joined us in the last 14 months, that's where we all stand. The people of the community have come together. We are all neighbors in this. So they doing this to us, they doing this to y'all too, because y'all sitting right here, y'all are neighbors right now. As part of this institution, y'all are our neighbors. They're trying to sweep us out. This is where we stand. This is where we put our feet in the ground. And this is where we bear arms at, and we make our stand right here. And one thing I want to get out as far as this question is everything that we have done has been for the people of the community, nothing more, nothing less. Our fight is for the people of the neighborhood that have made it thrive for decades. This area alone, the Black Bottom, 70 years of gentrification and washout of thriving Black and brown communities here. It's been a washout since the 1940s. The developers and the universities have washed out many of communities. We're fighting to keep this one alive. And we have formed a secondary community inside the one we already had that has become bigger, stronger, and more widespread in the Black Bottom neighborhood than ever. And we plan on keeping it that way. Come hell or high water, we plan on keeping it that way.
Just to contextualize the University City Townhome situation for people who maybe haven't read the articles or don't know much about it, but I think it was established in the late 60s, is that right? And there was, as Emily was mentioning, there was a Section 8 voucher program that sort of built and funded it, and it's privately owned. That contract expired in 2021. And can you give us a bit of just like the timeline of the organizing and what you've been doing since 2020, July 2021?
We officially started organizing in November, I believe it was, late October, early November. We started organizing, and the first thing that we did was residents that wanted to stay, because some residents had planned on moving somewhere down the line, but they have it forced upon us. That's a whole different matter when it's forced upon you to move when you can't do it in your own free will. And the first thing that we did, truthfully, is we came together and we set a council up. Because when you fight against any entities of developers or universities, you have to be organized. And it took a lot of work just to dig up information on things that we can bring to light and have a leg to stand on to fight this as a whole, as people. We needed information. And it took a lot of digging, took a lot of work, and we had some help with it because none of us knew what we was getting into when we started this. When we set up that encampment, 31 of the funnest days I've had in a long time. That was a statement. That was a statement of defiance against trying to put us out in the streets, out to these elements. Like, no. We have had a lot taken from us in our lifetimes. But my livelihood, our livelihoods, not gonna take that from us. We can fight for that, because if you ain't gonna fight for that, then what is truly your purpose? My purpose is to fight for everything I have and everything I want to get and everything I'm going to keep. And all the residents of the townhomes feel the same way. And can speak to that as well. And the encampment was our statement of defiance against the owner. Like, no, you want to put us out, you come here, you do it to us by force. Or leave us be. And that really kind of threw things into flux for the owner, the media attention, the public scrutiny, the publicity, all of that. It threw his whole ordinance of trying to get a buyer to sell the property into flux. And we had to capitalize on that. And we did that with public protests, to his establishments, his main office. His office here in West Philly was at 48th Street we went to. We crowded up the building. The building wasn't even half the size of this room.
Even his house
And
in
we-
his neighborhood.
House in his neighborhood, we tagged up flyers and everything. Just the public embarrassment. And I'm not gonna lie, Altman is strong-willed because he didn't respond to none of it. But guess who did? The higher ups right here in this institution. They had something to say because it started to affect them. And then we took our ordinance and started putting the pressure on this institution because it had to be done. Because we know they partners and all this development they've done with the housing in this area. That's all okay. Been always for the last 50 years. They've been a part of it. They've had the hands in the pies of this community for far too long, taking and stripping from us. But as we stand, and as we've been standing for the last 14 months, we attempted to take it back. And I feel as though, and we feel as though, that we can take it back, what they've taken from us as a whole. Yeah, I'm gonna go right ahead.
And the other thing is 37 other properties that are about to go through the same thing that we're going through in the next 2 years. They just want to go and tell them that they have to leave their homes. So we have to fight for them too. It's not like we can just pick up and move somewhere. It's not that simple. So we're reaching out to all of those properties as well and organizing with them so we can have a bigger fight. The more people we get involved, the bigger the fight becomes, the better the outcome will be. But they have to stop just coming into these neighborhoods and taking our homes. It's not fair. We pay rent just like everybody else. We have to live just like everybody else. Everybody is not always going to be on the same level. So they have to stop doing it to people, period, all over this country. It's just not right.
I just want to say one more thing. And Penn is not the only institution in light of this atrocity. The city is also have a huge hand in this, and we're holding everybody accountable. The institutions, the city, the state as a whole, because there is no structure to protect the people, the citizens, the communities that make this city thrive. There is no structure for protection for the people. We're trying to change that. we're attempting to change that. And that's what truly our movement is, but not only for housing is part of it, but we need structural change for better protection of communities and for the people as well. That's truly what this fight comes down to.
Thank you both. Like I mentioned, and we've talked about, and Sari or Emily, one of you talked about, it's not an isolated event, right? There's 37 the next couple of years, there's like 1,700 the next several years. So for the rest of the time, we're gonna pivot to like an open panel discussion and kind of talk about a little bit more around the problem, but also some potential solutions or pathways to solutions. So for everyone, and anyone can kind of take this, it seems to me like we've discussed a lot of the problems, although it's massive and complicated and there's a lot going on. But we're still facing massive hurdles to solving anything. And a lot of people are working on the housing crisis, right? But it seems like a lot of those things aren't working very well, though many of them are too. The point is that the question I want to ask is, like, what myths or misinformation do we see getting in the way of understanding what's happening and like moving forward solutions here?
I think the only myth is that there is no myth. Everything is straightforward. Like we haven't done what we have done by hysteria or any stories, quote unquote. We've taken direct action to protect our livelihoods, and that's truly what it's about. So where's the logic in the myth? There is no myth to any of this. This is straightforward protection of our livelihoods done by the people themselves, because the city has failed and other officials have failed to put an ordinance of protection in for the people. So we have taken upon ourselves to protect ourselves, because nobody's going to do it for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really difficult question. It's hard to say what's a myth in anyone's mind, but I think something that is borne out by the data and borne out by the experience that matches is this idea, which I think is a myth, that there's always someplace else to go. And I think what we see with the lack of affordable housing in Philadelphia based on incomes in Philadelphia is that that's simply not always the case. I don't know, I sort of describe housing affordability and housing crises as like being so complicated because they are simultaneously a deeply personal problem and crisis, like on the most basic fundamental levels. And they're also, it is the biggest problem, right? Where you have to think about macro at the same time, and it has to be citywide solutions and really nationwide solutions. But when you match these two things, it can be, I think, like going back to this myth, you can kind of like lose the focus on, I mean, really, is there really nowhere else to go? Like, really, you can't use your voucher? Yeah. I mean, it is really difficult to do that right now.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also curious, because you mentioned it earlier briefly, and we got a little bit about it, Emily, like how does investor buying tie into this narrative that we're discussing, at least in the work you've done so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think investor buying is definitely threatening the supply of affordable housing even more. It's making it harder for, Philadelphia actually has a tradition of there being higher than average number of lower income homeowners, which has been really wonderful. Part of that's because of the row home typology, but that's really threatened. And I think that one of the myths is sort of that there's only one type of displacement that happens, and there's lots of different types of displacement, or also stresses, right? Like a lot of people are living in really, terrible situations, putting up with poor conditions, or living in overcrowded situations. A lot of folks are in overcrowded situations because that's all they can afford. So people are living somewhere, but they're not living somewhere great. And this is why we hear about, there's lots of illegal rooming houses in Philadelphia. And so I think the more that can be done to sort of shine the light on who these investors are, and also on, some of the housing conditions in Philadelphia, I think we have to be more clear-eyed about what the solutions are, because I think there's lots of, sorry, this is getting off from your question, but I think part of the answer is also making communities more competitive with people like investors and with developers, and I think a lot of that is trying to figure out ways to expand community land trust models. It's not something that's ever been done on a really large scale, and I think it really needs to be. Driving around, we were updating our market study of the city yesterday, and driving around and noticing all these neighborhoods that sort of would have gentrified if not for their place-based subsidized housing. Like, you go a couple blocks west of Temple and there's a ton of housing there, and there's still diversity in that neighborhood, all because there's place-based housing that hasn't expired yet, right? And so I think another thing is thinking really long-term, like 30 years isn't long-term enough, but thinking about how do we have permanent affordable housing throughout the city for people.
And that's true, and that's truly what's needed. And not to veer on topic, but I heard this thing in the news the other day. Now I know a lot of y'all know about what's going on in Ukraine. And Texas is like they live in their own world or something. Like, it's like being on a whole different planet from what I know. But with the border policies that the president just put in, the people came in the bus from Texas up here yesterday. They came in yesterday. And they're set up at a warehouse or something in I forget what part of the city it was. My memory doesn't serve me too well, but anyway, they're trying to set all these people up with housing, and I'm listening to this, and I'm like, how are they going to set people up from out the country with housing when they can't even house their own? So I'm like, where's the lie? I mean, I'm not against anybody coming in and trying to find a place to build a better life. I'm like, if you can't house your own, how you gonna offer that service out to someone else? Like that's just mind blowing to me. It really is.
And another thing to that is the city is responsible for a whole lot of this, because they are the ones that let these developers come into Philadelphia and just point at stuff, I want that, and they let them have it. They don't care who lives there. What they don't care. All they see is money, and they have it. The city needs to stop letting that happen. They need to pay attention to that part of it, because we live here in Philadelphia. We are people, we are human beings. We have a right to live comfortable and safe and all of that, but they continue to let them come in here and just take that from people. It's not right. If the city, they have to find a way. They can find a better way to deal with this. They have to find a better way. I believe that they have the last say for the most part in what happens in Philadelphia. They are the ones that can say stop. Mayor Kenny won't even have a meeting with us. When we show up to his functions or something, you know what he does? He runs out the side door. He won't even sit and talk with us. He said to one of our organizers, "Oh, we don't deal with the housing thing." Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And for him to continuously run out the side door, it's not right. You need to stand up and deal with what's happening. And housing is what's happening in Philadelphia.
We'll do one more quick question. Mike, real quick. One more last question, and then we'll do a Q&A with the audience. But just in a few words, maybe each of you could say a quick bit about, as for us as current residents of Philadelphia, as future attorneys, many of us staying in the city, other of us going to other cities that are experiencing similar problems. Like, what can we do now? What can we start working towards in our own careers to contribute to solving some of these issues?
Sure, I'm not a lawyer, but there's plenty of ways for lawyers to get involved. We work with the attorneys at different public interest law groups all the time around both renter housing security and homeowner housing security, looking deeply into things like tangled titles is a really big deal and is thankfully getting a lot of attention. But I think there's lots of other ways lawyers get involved in important ways. So there was in 2020, City Council passed the Emergency Housing Protection Act, which mandated that landlords had to make payment plans available and had to waive late fees and things like that as a result of the pandemic. And I talked to the lawyer for the city who had to translate what the city council people wanted to do into something that would pass legal muster because they knew they were going to get sued by the landlords, right? And so just thinking about, like, there's so many different important parts. Like, you needed that attorney who knew how to make it so that they, when they did get sued, they succeeded and they beat that lawsuit, right? So that's another important thing. It's like, how do you put together these laws that are going to be most effective and powerful?
All right, so show of hands, how many of you are 3Ls? Okay, how many of you kind of know where you're going to be after? Okay, I won't put you on the spot since there's not that many hands up. But some of you, I mean, you're here, you obviously are interested in this issue. You may go straight into public interest law. Some of you have been our fantastic interns, and I know that's where your hearts are, and I know where you're gonna go. A bunch of you, no judgment at all, are gonna end up at private firms. Probably most of you, or most of the class will end up at private firms. Do not shirk pro bono opportunities. I mean, the Law Center partners with firms on all of our big high impact cases, every single one of them. And we do that as a means of resources and to expand the team and resources both in terms of expertise, but also just in terms of resources, financial resources. And our pro bono partners are part of the team. I mean, you are the lawyer on the case. And the case, there's no case too big or too small for you to get involved in as a pro bono attorney. You can do it through, direct legal services kind of programs. For example, there's Philly VIP, which is an awesome Philadelphia-based pro bono opportunity. Or you can do it, you can take, depending on the firm, of course, just take on a case. And I think you really will never learn more and be able to do more than to, take on some cases with individuals, think about doing some eviction defense, and really get to understanding what are the issues. You're not just gonna learn about housing, you're gonna learn about public benefits, which is a huge part of this that we have not talked about here today. But the system of public benefits in the country is a massive piece of the housing puzzle. And you will really, I think, put yourself in a place to be able to do great work in your life, no matter where you end up if you are starting out by working with the folks who are really in need of assistance to work with them. You're not serving them, they're your partners in your cases. And if I sound passionate, it's because I am. Wherever you end up, you have not lost the ability to do some really important legal work to help folks.
You don't want to share anything? It doesn't have to be for lawyers, it could be just for people who live here, right? Like, we all live here.
Well, one thing I think needs to be said is that the structure, city leaders, and then maybe some of you guys may end up reaching out to city leaders at some point, or even doing cases for city leaders, but there needs to be structure. There needs to be structure for people protection, and I can't stress this enough. There's no structure for the protection of the people of Philadelphia. There really isn't. And I mean, it goes way past housing. It's absolutely everything. Wage rates. Talking about people that deal with discrimination, whether it's financial, racial, or otherwise. It needs to be structured so these types of things do not happen to people. And I mean, we all deserve a chance to thrive. And it will come a time where laws for everyone will change. And you guys will be a part of that change for the better. And I wish you all the best in creating that change. And anything that I can do while I'm still breathing, I will work with y'all to help bring that change. Like my bio said, I'm a voice of power for the people, and I will be to the day I can't do it no more. Thank y'all so much.
So we've got about 13 minutes. We'll just do out loud Q&A if anyone has a question they want to ask one of our panelists. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned something about possible solutions. Like, what's the specific relief outcome that you guys are hoping to get here? And also, kind of tangentially, what changed with those expiring contracts that made them no longer attractive to whoever the owner is?
Say it again.
So the expiring contracts that, for this project as well as the 17 that are
Yeah.
going to be expiring.
Yeah.
What changed that made those less attractive or not? That made renewal, less of an attractive option.
Wait, you talk about as far as the town home? Oh, I'm sorry.
I can answer the second part. Do you want to answer the first part?
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to get the just understanding of what he's asking. You talking about the townhomes, right? What made them extend the contract?
Or why didn't they extend it?
Well, they extended it 3 times because it was originally set for July the 8th. But we made so much noise about that because that strictly wasn't enough time. You gave people, 12 months to find adequate housing in this city where the market is short and people don't have a lot of money. And the vouchers, and then we waiting on vouchers as well. So then they extended it to September, and then October, and now December the 27th. So they've extended it, 4 times? And gradual. A lot of it is because we made a lot of noise. We made a lot of noise. We made a big mess of the projects they were trying to do when was it Killinger, I believe it was had a bid up for it, and we really kind of messed into that by putting pressure on him as well as the owner himself. So it was extended because not only the actions that we did, but also because people just had a very tough time finding places that accepted the vouchers and finding places that had the same kind of resources that we do now. So, and I mean, all of this is the 40th Market. It's a lot of red. I'm sure y'all been through the neighborhood. It's a lot of resources around here. They trying to strip that from us.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I would just add to that and say, and then the reason, so there's plenty of low-income housing tax credit finance, project-based Section 8 housing that gets what's called re-syndicated after its 30-year cycle. It will get renewed so that it is affordable for another 30 years. And that happens all the time, but it doesn't happen in neighborhoods like University City, right? Because the market is so hot that the developer is just waiting until that deadline passes in order to, sell that for double the price, right? And so it's really important to get out ahead of those and work on doing those re-syndication plans and transferring the property if possible to a mission-oriented developer. And that's another thing lawyers do, is actually do these tax credit deals. It's really important to get another 30 years added, and it's not a mystery when the expiration is, right? This is all public information, so you can go out and look at market trends, you can see when they're gonna expire, you can actually get out ahead of it and try to find a new owner and transfer it before it gets to this point.
That's something we're actually in the midst of working on right now at this point.
Yeah.
One other thing we accomplished from fighting is they did stop the demolition on the property. And that's not gonna happen, as far as we know now, until
March of next year.
So that was a good thing that worked in our favor too.
That and, so when these contracts expire, it depends on the kind of the funding. It's all written into the federal code. It's frankly, it's pretty complicated. There's that, then there's a regulatory agreement with the state agency that sort of the financing flows through. But like one of the things I didn't cover, but I guess it's pretty obvious now, right, is that UC Townhome residents are going from getting a project-based voucher to a tenant-based voucher that they can move with. But because of their really successful organizing, they have what's called an enhanced voucher. Enhanced vouchers will pay above the minimum, the payment standard that Philadelphia Housing Authority sets for the city. So it's a much more competitive voucher to have, and that's really due to your incredible organizing. So.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you for being here today. This has been a great conversation. Obviously what's happening with University City Townhomes isn't an isolated instance. It's happening around the city and frankly around the country as well. Given that, I guess I was just wondering, from a policy perspective, is this the type of thing that should be attacked from a federal or like more broad policy standpoint, or is this something that cities and localities need to be targeting individually, or I guess somewhere of a crossover between the two?
All of the above. It really is kind of an all hands on deck. You can't overlook the federal dollars. Like, it is really, really important, but cities play, as you said, a major role in setting the land use policies within the city, the zoning policies within the city, and their budget. So, all hands on deck.
I just want to echo thank you so much for being here, and especially bringing the element of community, which I feel like is so not often talked about in housing affordability. Like, yes, you can maybe afford housing elsewhere, but you want to stay where you know and with your people. So my question is on the issue with vouchers. So I used to work in housing policy, and one of the conversations, at least in DC, we've been having is whether giving people cash instead of a housing voucher would be better. I'm just curious, do you think like if instead of a voucher you were just given X amount of dollars, you'd have an easier time finding housing? Obviously, the better outcome is staying at UC, but if that's not an option, and whether like through the federal government, or I know Philly has its own guaranteed income pilot, whether the city could just give you guys money, like thoughts on that as an option?
I mean, that would be a wonderful option, but let's look at the facts. The city ain't trying to give away no money. Neither is anybody else. I mean, let's be particularly honest. That's why they got this system in the first place, because they're not trying to give away dollars to individual people, especially when you're talking about a housing complex. That's massive amount of money you had to give out for people to move. And we know the city is are not trying to fund individuals like that, because that's a lot of money that's coming out of pocket to even do something. I mean, it would be a wonderful option for us, because it would probably make things easy. We ain't got to worry about a piece of paper that everybody could turn down. And if you're just paying in cash, then that's something that probably no one's going to turn down. But they can turn down a housing voucher, but not a lot of many people are going to turn down straight cash. And I mean, that's just being real. I'm not going to sugarcoat any question you have. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm going to be blunt with it. I mean, that would be a great option, but let's face it, the city is not willing to give out money like that. And they're not trying to give money out. They're not trying to even put money to help preserve the townhomes and all the other affordable housing in the city. So there's no way they're going to give up cash for individuals to move. I mean, that's a nice thought. Maybe some laws can be forced to change that someday. But until then, the city is not invested in giving cash to anybody, at least not my 40 plus years of living. I ain't never seen the city give out no cash unless they had a lawsuit against them.
And you know something else? There is no reason for no one in this country not to have housing. Nowhere, in no city, they have money where they can take, nobody has to be homeless, no one. They don't care. They rather make the money and go home to their families. They don't care what happens to the people in Philadelphia. in Chicago, in New York, anybody that has anything to do with making any money, they want to keep it. So for me, it's more valuable to fight to stay where we are. That would be the win for me. That would be the win for me
Absolutely.
and many other people in this country, just to see the example. You know.
Absolutely. And we're trying, and our fight is for us to be the example for not only just Philadelphia, not just for Pennsylvania, but in the entire country. To have their eyes tuned into what we're doing, to set an example.
It would open up so many doors for so many other people in this country. You know.
And it would scare the hell out of capitalists. Because we've had, like, the last 12 months, we have seen council members, mayors running. In literal fear of what we've done.
They run from us. They really do. If we show up somewhere, they say, "Oh my God, they go to University City residents," and they run out the side door. They don't even want to talk to us.
Oh, I'm gonna tell
But that goes to show you how much they care. They don't. So they rather duck in the corner, and we seen them do it. Run off the balconies, down back stairs. They just run.
Oh.
If we can get those people to sit down and listen, maybe we'll have a better outcome. But right now, they run.
I don't know, maybe that's because of me, because my voice has been so, like, you know, because I speak, because when I spoke about this, I spoke with a lot of anger. And it just came to the point where I've called out Mayor Kenny many a times, and some of the stuff that I said I'm not going to say in this room. But to be just like these people, the council members, the mayor, they need to be held accountable, because they are more than half of the reason that all this is happening. Because when that money is changed hands, the thought of the people is not even a consideration for them when that money change hands. And see, what needs to happen is if y'all want to do development, work with the people, talk with the people that live in these neighborhoods, and we can all come to terms, a discussion about development. You know, but see, they want to do things where the people are not involved because they want the resources for themselves and not for the people. That's what we have to change, and that's what we are attempting to change.
Like what they doing in Cobb's Creek, in Chinatown. But we joining up with those people too.
Mm-hmm.
It's horrible. They don't care. All they see is money.
And the Sixers should really be ashamed. I'm like, y'all, they should be ashamed of themselves. That's $1 billion organization. And y'all renting y'all stadium for Wells Fargo's, and now y'all want to build a new one in the neighborhood that's been thriving for well over half a century. What y'all need to take that money is buy that damn building y'all in now instead of renting it. Buy that building, stop being cheap, and stop being disrespectful to the community that supported this team. I'm not one of them because I'm not a Sixers fan. But there's a lot of people in Philly that are Sixers fans, and Philly fans are loyal. And the fact that they would be so disrespectful to try to displace another community, especially with all the hardships that Chinatown has had with the history. And when this whole started, I read a lot about what happened in Chinatown. The Vine Street Expressway, the convention center, and I don't know, most of y'all probably heard of Rivers Casino. They originally tried to put that in Chinatown. Tried to put a federal prison there. They tried to put the Phillies' new stadium there.